In the early 1950s, feeding a full family didn't require much money, just creativity. A mother could stretch a handful of basic ingredients into a breakfast that kept her husband working long shifts and her kids energized through school. What cost mere cents back then now feels impossible in today's world of packaged cereal and rising grocery bills. But here's what most people don't realize. Well, many of those simple meals were not just cheap, they were incredibly effective. Some were so reliable that government agencies even encouraged them during times of crisis. And strangely, modern nutrition experts are starting to admit that a few of these old-school breakfasts may have been healthier than what fills supermarket shelves today. These meals weren't fancy. They didn't come in colorful boxes or promise vitamins in cartoon shapes. They came from necessity. Families relied on what they had leftovers, scraps, pantry staples, and turned them into something filling and satisfying. Over time, though, aggressive marketing and convenience foods slowly erased these traditions from everyday life. Take something as simple as bread with rendered fat. Instead of butter, families would spread leftover cooking grease onto warm slices of bread. It was rich, salty, and deeply satisfying. Nothing was wasted. Every bit of flavor was used. Then there was cornmeal mush, a thick, hearty dish that could feed a family for days. Cooked slowly and served hot, it provided long-lasting energy. And if any was left over, it would be cooled, sliced, and fried the next morning for a completely new meal. Even something as basic as milk poured over toasted bread became a comforting breakfast when times were tight. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. It filled stomachs and brought warmth to cold mornings. These meals weren't just about survival, they were about efficiency, tradition, and knowing how to make the most out of very little. And yet, within just a couple of decades, they were replaced by faster, shinier options. The real question is, why did we abandon something that worked so well? Because what comes next wasn't just forgotten, it was deliberately replaced. And one of these breakfasts was so powerful it challenged everything modern food companies wanted you to believe.
As families moved through the 1950s, breakfast remained practical, filling, and deeply rooted in tradition. But beneath that, simplicity was something surprising. These meals were engineered by experience, not corporations. Consider a dish made from ham drippings and coffee. It sounds unusual today, but it created a bold, savory sauce poured over fresh biscuits. The ingredients were already in the kitchen, and the result was a breakfast that cost almost nothing yet delivered intense flavor. Then there was oatmeal, but not the sweet kind we know today. Instead of sugar, families added fat and salt. It might not sound appealing now, but that combination kept people full for hours. Modern advice about adding healthy fats, they had already figured that out decades earlier. Egg sandwiches were another staple, but far simpler than today's versions. One fried egg, a bit of seasoning, and bread. That was enough. No extras, no trends, just something quick, cheap, and effective. And when ingredients were even more limited, creativity stepped in. A simple, tomato-based gravy could transform basic bread into a full meal. It was tangy, rich, and surprisingly complex for something made from pantry leftovers. Even meals brought back from wartime kitchens found their place at home. Dried meat in a creamy sauce served over toast became a regular breakfast for many families. It was quick, filling, and easy to prepare, perfect for busy mornings. But here's where things started to shift. As food companies expanded, they didn't just sell products, they sold ideas. They convinced families that modern meant better, faster meant smarter, and anything homemade was outdated. Slowly, these meals began to disappear, not because they failed, but because they were replaced. And one particular breakfast became the center of that transformation. Because the next meal on this list wasn't just common, it was targeted. And what replaced it changed the way entire generations eat breakfast today. Some of the most powerful breakfasts weren't flashy, they were resourceful. They came from a mindset where nothing was wasted and every ingredient had value. Leftovers, for example, were never thrown away. Potatoes from dinner became crispy cakes the next morning. With just a few added ingredients, they turned into something entirely new. Golden on the outside, soft on the inside, and incredibly satisfying. In certain communities, even stale bread had a second life. Combined with hot coffee and a touch of cream, it transformed into a warm, comforting dish that people actually looked forward to. It wasn't about luxury, it was about making the most of what you had. Corn-based meals also played a huge role. Simple mixtures of ground corn, water, and fat could be shaped, cooked, and served in countless ways. These dishes carried generations of history and were deeply tied to culture and survival. And then, there were clever tricks like cutting a hole in bread and cooking an egg right in the center. It turned basic ingredients into something fun, efficient, and surprisingly appealing, especially for children. Regional specialties added even more variety. Some areas relied on unique combinations of meats and grains, creating dishes that were both filling and deeply flavorful. These meals defined local identity, but they struggled to survive as food systems became more industrialized. As supermarkets grew and convenience foods took over, these traditions didn't adapt. They vanished. Recipes weren't written down because they were never meant to be. Everyone simply knew them until they didn't. What replaced them was easier, faster, and heavily marketed, but not necessarily better. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. And then we go. It was a shift in how people thought about cooking entirely, because the next set of breakfasts proved something uncomfortable. Some of the most nutritious meals ever created were also the ones that cost almost nothing. By the time you reach the final group of these forgotten breakfasts, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The less people had, the more creative and effective their meals became. Rice, for instance, wasn't a just dinner. It became breakfast the next day, mixed with milk and a bit of sweetness. It created a simple dish that required no cooking at all. It was fast, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. In other cases, fermentation played a role. Certain traditional methods turned basic ingredients into nutrient-rich foods without any modern processing. What cost almost nothing back then is now replicated in expensive health products. And when resources were extremely limited, people adapted even further. Basic combinations of flour, fat, and liquid became sauces that could stretch a meal and feed entire families. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked and it kept people going through the hardest times. Even something as simple as frying leftover dough became a treat. It required no extra ingredients, just time and heat, yet it created something warm, soft, and memorable. Today, similar foods are sold at high prices, despite once being essentially free. What's striking is how efficient these meals were. They delivered energy, nutrition, and satisfaction with minimal waste. They were built on understanding ingredients, not relying on packaging. But as convenience became king, these methods faded. Skills that once defined everyday cooking were replaced by pre-made options. Knowledge passed down for generations slowly disappeared. Now, we spend more, waste more, and often get less in return. Maybe the real lesson here isn't just about food, it's about what happens when simplicity is replaced by convenience. So the next time you sit down for breakfast, ask yourself, are you eating something better? Or just something new?